He smelled a new perfume and knew something was wrong. It was a Thursday, and I was holding my wife, Clara, in the kitchen. She was making pancakes, our Saturday morning ritual, but it was a school night. She'd said she wanted to make a boring Thursday feel special, and I'd come up behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, burying my face in the crook of her neck. That's when it hit me. A scent that was sharp and floral, something with notes of night-blooming jasmine and a hint of spice that was completely foreign. It wasn't the soft, vanilla and sandalwood scent of her usual perfume, the one I'd bought for her on our 5th anniversary. This was someone else's smell. It clung to her skin, to her hair, like a ghost. My arms loosened their hold just slightly. She felt it. "What's wrong, Liam?" she asked, her voice light. But I heard a tiny thread of tension in it, a high-pitched note that wasn't usually there. "Nothing, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile into my voice. "Just happy to be home." But I wasn't. The scent was a key, turning a lock in a door I never knew existed, and behind it, a cold dread began to seep into my heart. If you've ever had that one small, inexplicable detail shatter your entire reality, you'll relate to what happened next. I stepped back, pretending to check my phone. "Smells great. Just gotta answer this work email real quick." I fled to the living room, my mind racing. Maybe it was a sample from a magazine. Maybe she'd been to a department store. But the scent wasn't a top note, something that would fade quickly. It was a base note, woven into her skin. She'd had to have been wearing it for hours. I sat on our sofa, the same one we'd picked out together after a long, laughing argument over beige versus gray, and I tried to remember the last few weeks. Clara had been working later. She said the accounting firm was swamped with the end-of-quarter audits. There'd been a few girls' nights that had run longer than usual. I'd never thought twice about it. I trusted her. I loved her. We were Liam and Clara. We'd been together since college. 2 kids from nowhere who built a life together. We had a 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, who was the carbon copy of her mother, and a golden retriever named Buster who was currently snoring at my feet, oblivious to the earthquake happening in my soul. Later, at dinner, I watched her. She was telling a funny story about something that had happened at the office. Her hands animated, her laugh that same bell-like sound that had drawn me to her across a crowded campus bar 15 years ago. But now all I could see were tiny cracks. The way her eyes flicked to her phone, face down on the table, every few minutes. The new password on that phone, which she'd explained away as a necessary security upgrade. The subtle distance in her hugs, a stiffness that I'd attributed to stress. The perfume was the proof my subconscious had been waiting for. It was the color dropped onto a black and white photograph, and the picture it revealed was ugly. "You're quiet tonight, Dad," Sophie said, her small voice pulling me from the abyss. "Just thinking, sweet pea," I said, reaching over to ruffle her hair, "about how much I love my 2 favorite girls." Clara smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was a shadow there, a secret, and I knew, with a certainty that made the pancake in my stomach turn to stone, that the secret wasn't mine to know. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I became a detective in my own life, a spy in my own home. I went through credit card statements, finding nothing unusual. I checked her phone when she was in the shower, but the new password was a fortress I couldn't breach. I started driving by her office on my lunch break, my heart in my throat, looking for a strange car, a familiar face. I saw nothing. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe the stress of my own job, the monotony of middle-aged life, was making me paranoid. That's what I tried to tell myself on Saturday morning when I found the receipt. I was taking out the trash, a chore I hated, when a crumpled slip of paper in the kitchen bin caught my eye. It was from a boutique hotel downtown, the Alistair, dated 3 days prior. The charge was for the hotel's spa, a couple's massage. A couple's massage. The world tilted on its axis. I stood there, the bag of trash in my hand, the smell of rotting coffee grounds and banana peels filling my nose. But all I could smell was that damned jasmine perfume. Confronting her outright felt wrong. If I was mistaken, I would shatter the trust we'd spent a lifetime building. And if I was right, I wasn't ready to know. Not yet. I needed proof, undeniable proof. So I hired someone. It felt like a cliché, a scene from a bad movie, but desperation makes clichés out of all of us. His name was Mark, and he was a former cop, all business and quiet efficiency. I gave him a photo of Clara, her work schedule, and a retainer that made my bank account weep. "I'll know within a week," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. That week was the longest of my life. I played the part of the loving husband going through the motions. I kissed Clara goodbye in the mornings. I helped Sophie with her homework. I mowed the lawn. But inside, I was a ghost, haunting my own life, waiting for the final piece of evidence to exorcise me completely. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found a receipt like that? Would you confront them, or would you do what I did? Mark called me 6 days later. "Let's meet," he said. We met in a diner on the other side of town, a place with sticky vinyl booths and the smell of old grease. He slid a manila envelope across the table. His expression was grim.
"I'm sorry, Liam."
My hands were trembling as I opened it. There were photographs. Clara, leaving her office building, not in her work clothes, but in a sleek black dress I'd never seen before. Clara, getting into a car, a sleek, black Audi that wasn't hers. And then the final blow. A photograph of her, laughing, her head thrown back, walking arm in arm with a man into the Alistair Hotel. The man was David. David Miller. My boss. My mentor. The man who had hired me straight out of business school, who had championed my rise to vice president of operations, who I considered a friend. The betrayal was a double-edged sword, plunged so deep into my gut I couldn't breathe. My wife and my boss. The two people I trusted most in the world, outside of my daughter. The world went gray at the edges. I think I made a sound, a choked, animal noise, because Mark looked at me with pity. "There's more," he said softly.
"Audio."
He handed me a small digital recorder. I pressed play. Their voices, familiar and yet suddenly monstrous, filled the space between us. Clara's laugh, then David's smooth, confident baritone. "He still has no idea, does he?" David said. "None," Clara replied, her voice dripping with a contempt I'd never heard from her. "He's so wrapped up in his projects, he wouldn't notice if I painted the house purple. He's oblivious. It makes this so easy." David chuckled. "Once the merger goes through next month and I'm officially CEO, we can stop all this sneaking around. We can be together properly. The bonus I'll get will set us up for life, far away from here." "I can't wait," Clara whispered. "I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of him." The recorder clicked off. I sat there, the photos scattered on the table, the words, "I'm tired of him," echoing in the hollowed-out cavern of my chest. "Stay till the end because what happens next will shock you." I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. I drove to a cheap motel, the kind with thin walls and the smell of mildew, and I sat in the dark. I cried. I screamed into a pillow. I punched the wall until my knuckles were raw and bloody. The rage was a living thing, a fire that threatened to consume me. But then, as the sun began to rise, painting the cheap motel curtains with a pale, sickly light, the rage began to cool and harden into something else. Something cold and sharp and purposeful. Revenge. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was a fool, a stepping stone in their grand plan. David was using me to secure his promotion, to make the merger, a huge, company-defining deal that I had personally managed for the last 18 months, go smoothly. He needed my expertise, my relationships with the client. And Clara, she was waiting for the payoff, the big bonus, the comfortable life. They were going to discard me like yesterday's trash. But I wasn't going to let them. I wasn't going to be the victim in their story. I was going to become the author of my own. The plan began to form, not in a flash of inspiration, but piece by piece, like assembling a deadly weapon. I would give them exactly what they wanted. An oblivious Liam, a trusting, hard-working husband and employee. I went home the next morning, my story prepared. "Sorry, honey," I said, looking Clara in the eye for the first time since I'd learned the truth. I saw no guilt there, only a faint annoyance. I got absolutely slammed at work, pulled an all-nighter on the merger documents. Must have fallen asleep at my desk. My phone died. I sold the lie with a weary smile and a kiss on her cheek that tasted like ash. She bought it. Why wouldn't she? She thought I was a fool. At work, I was the model of dedication. I met with David, looking him straight in the eye, discussing the merger timelines, asking for his advice, playing the loyal lieutenant. He clapped me on the back. This merger is going to be the making of us. Liam, you're doing brilliant work. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but I just nodded, a grateful smile on my face. Couldn't do it without your leadership, David. I was laying the groundwork for my first twist, the one that would break his world. With him gone, there's no one to question anything. The merger goes through, we get the money, we start our life. It's simple. But what about Sophie? The mention of my daughter's name made my heart stop. What about her? David said, his voice cold. She's his. She'll go to his parents. It's cleaner that way. There was a long silence. Then Clara spoke, and her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. You're right. You're always right. In that moment, any last shred of love I had for Clara died. She was not just a cheating wife. She was a conspirator in my potential murder, a woman willing to abandon her own child for a new life. The game had just changed entirely. The merger signing was set for a Friday. On Wednesday, I set my final pieces in motion. I scheduled a meeting with the board of directors for Thursday afternoon, under the guise of a final pre-merger briefing. But that wasn't the only meeting I scheduled. I also sent an encrypted file, containing all the evidence I had gathered, the photos, the audio recordings of their affair and their murder plot, the doctored financials, to a private, secure email address. The final piece of my revenge. That Thursday, I kissed Sophie goodbye for school, holding her a little too tight. I love you more than anything in this world, sweet pea. I whispered into her hair. Remember that, no matter what. I then turned to Clara. She was dressed for work, looking beautiful and, to my now knowing eyes, utterly treacherous. Big day today, I said, forcing a smile. The final briefing with the board. Wish me luck. Good luck, Liam, she said, giving me a perfunctory peck on the cheek. She didn't even look me in the eye. She was already gone. I drove to work, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, focused intensity. I went to my office and waited. At 2 o'clock, I walked into the boardroom. The entire board was there, along with David, who was sitting at the head of the table, beaming with smug anticipation. Liam, perfect. We're all eager to hear your final thoughts before we cross the finish line tomorrow, David said, his tone patronizing. I nodded, plugged my laptop into the projector, and took a deep breath. Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice steady. Today, I'm not here to talk about the merger. A confused murmur rippled through the room. David's smile tightened. Then what are you here for, Liam? I clicked a button on my laptop. The first slide appeared on the screen. It wasn't a financial chart. It was a photograph of Clara and David, locked in an embrace outside the Alistair Hotel. The room went dead silent. David's face drained of all color. I'm here, I said, my voice clear and cold, to discuss a matter of gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and a conspiracy to commit murder. The room erupted. I clicked through the slides, showing the doctored financials, explaining how David had directed me to make the changes to inflate the company's value for his own personal gain. I then played the audio. Their voices, plotting my death, filled the sterile corporate air. The looks on the board members' faces shifted from confusion to horror to outright fury. David was stammering, trying to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable, a tidal wave of his own making. Security was called. He was escorted from the building, his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, evaporating in an instant. That was my first revenge. But the story isn't over. The biggest twist was yet to come. I drove home, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The revenge had been satisfying, a surgical strike, but it didn't fill the hole they had torn in my life. I walked into my house. It was quiet, too quiet. Then I saw her. Clara was standing in the living room, her suitcase packed at her feet. She was as white as a sheet. Her phone was in her hand, and it was clear she had been trying to call David. "It's over, Clara," I said, my voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "I know everything. The affair. The plan to sabotage the merger. The life insurance. The accident." She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You ruined him," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You ruined everything." "No," I said calmly. "You ruined us. I just evened the score." I expected her to break down, to beg, to explain. But she didn't. Instead, a strange, cold smile touched her lips. It was a smile I'd never seen before. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Liam? You think you've won." She took a step toward me. "There's something you don't know. Something you never knew." My blood ran cold. What now? What other betrayal could there possibly be? "What are you talking about?" "Sophie," she said, and the name was a weapon. "She's not yours." The world stopped. The floor fell away from beneath my feet. Those 4 words hit me with more force than all the photographs and audio recordings combined. "What?" I breathed, the word barely audible. "She's not yours," Clara repeated, her voice gaining strength, laced with a venomous triumph. "I was pregnant when I married you. I didn't know who the father was. It was easier to let you believe she was yours. You were so happy. So convenient." She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "All these years, you've been raising another man's daughter. David's daughter." The final twist of the knife. It was the masterstroke of their betrayal, a secret 7 years in the making. All the memories, all the love, every moment I had spent with my little girl. It was all built on a lie. The love of my life was a lie. My daughter was a lie. I felt myself breaking apart, shattering into a million pieces. I thought I had known heartbreak before, but this was annihilation. I must have made a sound, a gasp of pure agony, because her smile widened. "That's right," she said softly. "All your revenge, your little plan. You just destroyed the biological father of your precious Sophie. How does it feel, Liam? How does it feel to know you've been living a lie for 7 years?" I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just stared at this stranger I had called my wife. And then, a small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy." I turned. Sophie was standing there, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and frightened. She had heard everything. She had heard her mother say she wasn't mine. The look on her face, the confusion, the fear, it broke what was left of my heart. In that moment, it didn't matter. Biology didn't matter. The 7 years of bedtime stories, of skinned knees, of lullabies and uncontrollable giggles. That was what mattered. She was my daughter. In every way that counted, she was mine. I walked past Clara, this vile, hateful woman, and I knelt down in front of Sophie. "Hey, sweet pea," I said, my voice thick with tears I could no longer hold back. "It's okay. Daddy's here." I wrapped my arms around her. This little girl who was my whole world, and I held her tight. "I love you," I whispered into her hair. "I will always love you. You are my daughter. Never forget that." Over her shoulder, I looked at Clara. The triumph in her eyes had faded, replaced by a dawning realization. She had lost. She had lost everything. She had lost David. She had lost her comfortable life. And in that moment, she saw that she had lost her daughter, too. Because the man holding that little girl wasn't just a biological placeholder. He was her father. Clara left that night. She took her suitcase and walked out the door without a backward glance at Sophie, who was sobbing in my arms. The legal battles were long and ugly, but with the evidence I had, the recorded murder plot, the proof of her instability and abandonment, full custody was granted to me without question. David was prosecuted for corporate fraud and conspiracy. He's in prison now. The company, grateful that I had exposed the rot before the merger collapsed, offered me David's old job. I turned it down. I couldn't stay in that building, in that life. I sold the house, the one filled with so many ghosts, Sophie and I moved to a new town, a fresh start. It's been 2 years now. The pain is a scar, not an open wound. Some days are hard. Some days, the memory of that jasmine perfume will hit me in a grocery store and my heart will stop for a second. Some days, Sophie will ask a question about her mother, and I'll have to find the words to explain the inexplicable. But we are happy. We have a small house with a big yard for Buster. We have pancake Saturdays and we laugh a lot. She calls me Dad, and that is the only title I have ever needed. He smelled a new perfume and knew something was wrong. That scent was the first thread, and when I pulled it, my entire life unraveled. But from those ruins I built a new one, a real one, a life based on the only truth that ever really mattered, the love between a father and his daughter. A love that no betrayal could ever truly break. If this story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a father's unwavering love touched you, if it made you feel that roller coaster of anger and hope, then hit subscribe and don't miss the next heartbreak that will leave you speechless. Every story on this channel is a journey into the deepest emotions, and your support is what keeps me telling them. Thank you for listening.